The air in the Allegheny Mountains on that frigid night in December 1923 was thick with the scent of pine and coal smoke, a smell inextricably linked to American ambition. It was the smell of the nation's lifeblood, transported on steel rails that cut through the darkness. Inside the U.S. mail car number 493, the air was warmer, cramped, and humming with the low rhythmic grind of the train wheels. Sorting clerks, known affectionately across the country as railway post office men, worked under harsh, swinging lamps. These men were the unsung heroes of communication, the human cogs of a vast machine that connected every town, farm, and factory across the continent. They wore pistols on their hips, not for show, but because the U.S. mail was not just delivering letters, it was transporting the literal wealth of America. Registered bank drafts, payrolls for entire industrial towns, Liberty bonds, and millions in cash. Tonight, the Chicago Special was hauling a payload heavier than usual, including $400,000 in negotiable securities destined for the Federal Reserve, a sum that would be equivalent to over $7 million today. Suddenly, the familiar metallic rhythm was shattered, not by a natural disaster, but by a sound more chilling, the tearing of steel and the desperate high-pitched scream of the engine's emergency whistle. The train slammed to an unnatural halt, jolting the sorting clerks, throwing sacks of letters across the floor. Outside, the silence returned, heavier and more menacing. It was broken only by the crunch of heavy boots on the gravel alongside the tracks. "U.S. Mail, open the door or we blow you straight to hell," a voice barked, amplified by the cold air, devoid of regional accent, terrifying in its professional malice. The men inside the mail car were hardened. They didn't open the door. They reached for their weapons. But these were not common bandits. This gang, a small, highly organized domestic terrorist cell with unknown aims, had not planned a simple stick-up. They had dynamite. Not just a few sticks, but enough to tear the armored steel car open like a sardine can. The ensuing blast was deafening, a flash of white-hot light that briefly illuminated the snow-dusted woods. When the smoke cleared, the steel door of car number 493 was warped inward, and the sorting clerks inside were dazed, bleeding, and defeated. This was the beginning of a crime spree that would terrify the nation, threaten the very stability of the U.S. Postal Service, and force the federal government to unleash a new, unprecedented form of law enforcement, a unit of hyper-specialized, highly trained investigators who would eventually become known as the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. This single night in the Allegheny Mountains was not just a robbery, it was the birth pang of America's modern security state.
The shockwave from the December train robbery traveled faster than the fastest express train, hitting Washington, D.C. less than 12 hours later. Postmaster General Harry S. New, a man who carried the dignity of his office like a second starched shirt, received the news in his opulent, high-ceilinged office. $400,000, sir, and 3 clerks hospitalized, one with a broken arm from the blast, reported his grim-faced chief inspector, William J. Burns. Burns himself was a figure of legend, a hard-bitten former Secret Service agent who had founded his own famous private detective agency before taking the helm of the Post Office Inspection Service. His face was usually a mask of calm certainty, but today it was etched with a profound frustration. This wasn't an isolated incident. The previous 18 months had seen 12 major mail train robberies across the United States. They struck everywhere, from the prairies of Nebraska to the rail yards of New Jersey. The targets were always the same, high-value shipments, and the methods were always identical: dynamite, machine guns, and absolute precision. The Postmaster General pounded his mahogany desk, the sound echoing in the silent room. "Bill, the public is losing faith. Our railways are the arteries of commerce. If they cannot trust the mail, they cannot trust the system. The newspapers are calling us soft. They are saying these bandits are domestic Bolsheviks, professional criminals waging war on capitalism." This was the core of the panic. In the post-war, pre-Depression America of the 1920s, fear of communism and anarchy was rampant. The mail robberies felt less like petty crime and more like a coordinated attack on the nation's infrastructure and wealth. Burns leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. "Sir, we have exhausted our local resources. The thieves use coded language, operate across state lines instantly, and vanish without leaving a useful trace. Local police are outgunned and outmaneuvered. These are not common thugs, they are specialists." The truth was, the federal government almost had no mechanism for interstate criminal investigation. The postal inspectors were the best the nation had, but their jurisdiction was limited. The Department of Justice, or DOJ, had an investigatory arm, the Bureau of Investigation, or BOI, but it was tiny, underfunded, and notoriously ineffective, staffed primarily by political cronies. "Then we need something new, Bill," Postmaster General New declared, his voice firming into resolve. "We need a unit that is as specialized as the criminals. We need men who do not just chase leads, but analyze them. Men who build a profile, not just a case file. You and the BOI need to cooperate, and you need to bring in every resource you have, no matter how unconventional." The decision was made. The Post Office Inspection Service, with its street-level knowledge, would be joined by the embryonic, struggling BOI. And the man who would be tasked with overseeing this massive interagency manhunt, the man who would shape the entire future of American law enforcement, was waiting in the wings. A meticulous, ruthlessly ambitious young man named J. Edgar Hoover.
Across town, in the drab, low-rent offices of the Bureau of Investigation, John Edgar Hoover sat amidst a chaotic stack of dusty records. At just 28, Hoover was the BOI's assistant director, a position he'd attained through sheer, obsessive work ethic and an almost fanatical belief in the power of data. While the rest of the country was preoccupied with jazz, flapper dresses, and prohibition, Hoover was obsessed with one thing: the card catalog. "No more gumshoes, Mr. Tolson," he muttered to his chief aide without looking up. "The days of the drunken private eye solving crimes with hunches are over. This is a scientific age. We will not find these train robbers by chasing rumors in back alleys. We will find them with facts." Hoover had spent years creating what he called the Master Index, a vast cross-referenced file system detailing every known criminal, radical, and person of interest in the United States. He was a revolutionary, arguing that law enforcement needed to stop treating every crime as an isolated event and start seeing the pattern. The mail train robberies were the perfect test case for his radical, scientific methodology. He spread out a series of photographs and diagrams on his desk. They were images of the wrecked mail cars. "Look at this, Tolson." He pointed to the blast pattern on car number 493. "An untrained bomber places the charge in the center of the door to blow it open. Amateurs. These men placed it low and to the side where the steel joins the frame. It blew the hinge and warped the door inward, minimizing shrapnel